data. When, since, like I said, we are done with primary data, we have spoken about quantitative research methods and we've spoken about qualitative research methods, both under the heading of primary data. We'll move on and start with secondary data today. Secondary data, we've already discussed initially, right at the beginning, we've already discussed what secondary data is. When we use the term secondary data, we're actually referring to the data that exists beforehand. We're talking about the data that has already been collected by any other sociologist, any other government organization, any other sociological organization, or an individual. Could be any organization or an individual or any group. Any data that has already been collected, all you're doing is bringing it to use for yourself as a sociologist. So for you, it would be secondary data, right? One. Number two, when we talk about secondary data, we'd broadly put this into two different categories. We would initially talk about quantitative secondary data, examples of quantitative data, and then we'd move on and we talk about qualitative data. Quantitative, and then we'd move on and talk about qualitative data, quantitative, qualitative. Now, to get started with the first and the foremost, before we proceed, I'd want everyone to copy down this question that you all see over here. This is a question that we had in our CIs, May-June 2021, variant 1-2, that is zone 4 variant, the variant that we all appear for, kids from Pakistan appear for this variant 1-2. So 1-2, 2-2, 3-2, and 4-2, where 1-2 and 2-2 is for AS and 3-2 and 4-2 is for A2. The question over here says, explain one strength and one limitation of official statistics. And this is a 6-mark question. I did? Okay. But this wasn't in your test. No, because we hadn't covered it. So explain one strength and one limitation of official statistics. To get started with, what exactly are official statistics? So when we talk about official statistics, these are statistics that are collected by government organizations for their own use. Statistics that are collected by government organizations for their own use. And they vary. Let's start off with birth rate, death rate, and almost everything in between. Marriage rate, employment rate, unemployment rate, fertility rate, crime rate, so on and so forth. They're all examples of official statistics. They're official statistics because the government is collecting them, right? And if a sociologist puts them to use, if a sociologist uses them, we refer to them as an example of secondary data. So जब हम बात करते हैं about official statistics, today our focus would be on crime statistics. Crime statistics, of course, are an example of official statistics because it's the law enforcement agencies. It's the law enforcement agencies that are collecting these statistics and then reporting them to higher authorities, right? So, official statistics are numerical data produced by national and local government. They cover a wide range of issues, including birth, death, marriage, and divorces, the distribution of income and wealth, crime and sentencing, and unemployment. Sources of official statistics include government departments and agencies and surveys such as censuses of the population. Now, before we actually get started with this, let me remind you all, uh, like you all, I'm sure, do have this at the back of your mind that your syllabus just changed in 2021. अगर हम 2021 से पीछे चले जाते हैं तो this topic official statistics has been a very popular topic in terms of your CIs, and keeping that in mind, there is a high likelihood that you might end up getting this question as a 26-mark question as well. You could get a 26-mark question on official statistics. Once we're done with this, once we're done with this entire topic, I'd want to share a question and an answer with you on official statistics as well. So getting started with this tiny little paragraph right in front of you says, crime statistics, they are an example of official statistics. So for now, we would start off with crime statistics and we'd speak about how these crime statistics are used by sociologists. To get started with, Crime statistics are a widely used form of official statistics. In many countries, they are published annually, reported by the media, and commented by the government of the day, right? Now, these are statistics that hold a lot of value. Like I said, for many governments, they are officially published. They're officially published by governments, right? In the USA and the UK, they're both developed countries. For example, there are two sets of official statistics that measure the extent of crime. Number one that counts crimes recorded by the police, and the one that counts crime victimization. Now we talking about, or rather we dealing with two different aspects over here. पहली बात, the crime that is recorded by the police, right? अब वो crime जिसे पुलिस रिकॉर्ड करती है, एक वो कैटेगरी है हमारे पास, right? Bear this thing in mind, not every crime that is committed is recorded. Bear this thing in your mind, right? And while discussing this, yes, dark figure, while discussing this, I had already given you an idea about what dark figures are. When you use the term dark figure, my dear, is the difference between the crime committed and crime recorded. For instance, if I give you the example that I had given earlier, डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस के अंदर डार्क फिगर ज्यादा होता है, क्यों? क्योंकि डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस ज्यादा होता है और रिकॉर्ड कम किया जाता है, ठीक है, कम. देयर आर मेनी रीजंस दैट वुड बी अनदर लिस्ट ऑफ रीजंस एज टू व्हाई डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस को विक्टिम खुद रिपोर्ट नहीं करता, अक्सर पुलिस उसको रिकॉर्ड नहीं कर रही होती. देयर आर मेनी रीजंस बिहाइंड दिस. Likewise, if I talk about motor vehicle theft, dark figure in case of motor vehicle theft would be low. Why is it that dark figure in case of motor vehicle theft would be low? It would be low because almost everyone whose vehicle gets stolen gets it recorded. Okay? And on the other hand, not everyone who goes through domestic violence goes and gets it recorded. So moving on, when you talk about crime statistics, like I just said a minute earlier, यूएसए और यूके के अंदर आपके पास दो अलग अलग तरीके से ये क्राइम को रिकॉर्ड किया जाता है. वन, द numbers that count the crimes recorded by the police, and number two, the counts that come from the victims. Now if we talk about the crimes that are reported or recorded by the police, ठीक है, एक वो क्राइम्स हैं जो पुलिस रिकॉर्ड कर रही होती है और एक वो क्राइम्स हैं जो कि आप विक्टिम्स से थ्रू सर्वेज वो इंफॉर्मेशन वो डाटा लेते हैं, ठीक है. माइंड इट, if we talk about the crimes that are recorded by the police, they have their own flaws. Like I just said a minute earlier, not every crime goes recorded, right? Number two, the victimization surveys. Victimization surveys have their own flaws too. For instance, there are so many cases जहाँ पे victim खुद record नहीं करा सकता. In case of a murder, we're talking about someone who was killed. How do you think someone who was killed, who's already dead, can get this recorded? तो victimization surveys के अंदर ही problems होती हैं. And at the same time, another important thing that has to be kept in mind at this point is, when you talk about these victimization surveys के अंदर, the crimes that have been recorded by the police or the crimes that have not been recorded by the police, दोनों को आप रजिस्टर करा सकते हैं, ठीक है. आई वांट एवरीवन टू कीप दिस इन योर माइंड. लेट मी रिपीट, व्हेन यू टॉक अबाउट दीस विक्टिमाइजेशन सर्वेज, जरूरी नहीं है कि वो क्राइम्स जो कि पुलिस ने रिकॉर्ड किए हैं सिर्फ वही रिपोर्ट हो या रिकॉर्ड हो इसके अंदर. वो क्राइम्स जो पुलिस ने रिकॉर्ड नहीं भी किए, उनको भी विक्टिमाइजेशन सर्वेज, they can also be recorded through victimization surveys. Do we understand this? Now, taking it a step ahead, in the USA, for instance, the uniform crime reports are based on law enforcement agencies' monthly crime reports to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Now, see, if there's something that has happened, the police records it, and the police then has to, like I had mentioned a couple of minutes earlier, the police then further sends that data to their higher authorities. And in this case, we're talking about these monthly crime reports being sent to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, also known as FBI, which I'm sure we all know of, right? So taking it a step ahead, this was an example of the crimes that are recorded by the police. If I take it a step further, and if we talk about the crimes, if I talk about the victimization surveys, crime victimization surveys, the National Crime Victimization Survey is based on a survey of households and individuals. It covers reported and unreported crime from the victim's perspective. Clear? Does anyone have any question? Summing this entire thing up for the third time now, what I said was, आपके पास developed countries में, especially for now we're talking about the USA and UK, अलग अलग तरीके से crime record होता है. If we talk about USA over here, the Uniform Crime Report is sent every month to the FBI. And on the other hand, we spoke about National Crime Victimization Surveys. Do we proceed? Now, taking it ahead, police recorded crime, that is, police recorded crime consists of crimes actually recorded by the police. We may refer to them as PRC, but if you're writing it in your paper, if you have to use police reported crimes multiple times, at least for the first time when you're writing it, आप पूरा लिखें police recorded crime और उसके साथ bracket में, as you see it written over here, PRC लिखते हैं, and then you could continue using PRC. But you need to put the full form at least once there for the examiner to know that you know what you're talking about. Most PRCs based on reports by the police. Although statistics on PRC may appear to be a straightforward measure of the extent of crime in 1 year, they have their own limitations as well. Do we understand this? Critiques argue that they do not provide an accurate or complete picture of the total amount of crime committed. For example, they exclude certain crimes. Let's have a look at the crimes that they exclude. Let me remind you all, you might as well get a 4-mark question on this. The examiner might end up asking you about examples, about 2 examples as to when there are crimes that are committed but they're not reported or recorded by the police. Clear? Now, have a look at these. The first point over here is not being discovered or witnessed. There's a high possibility that there was a crime that was committed, but no one got to know about it, right? There was no witness, no one got it recorded. Do we get this? The second one now, because it has been witnessed but not reported to the police because, for example, the victim sees the crime as too trivial. I'm assuming you know what the word trivial means over here. Something too small, right? Such as petty vandalism. Do we all know what vandalism is? Destroying public property. The way kids, I've seen काफी desks के ऊपर बच्चों ने कुछ लिखा हुआ होता है. Right? If they're too obsessed with their name, maybe come across a lot of stuff written. That's an example of vandalism, petty vandalism. It might be discovered. There might be a witness to it as well, but there's always a chance that someone might not go and get it reported. If it's not reported, it's not recorded. Very simple. Number 3, yeah. When crime is not? See, if it's not reported, it's not recorded either. Right? Number 3, it has been reported to the police but not recorded by them because they are under pressure to meet performance targets. Yes. Corruption. If we talk about, if we take all of this through the law enforcement agencies' perspective, of course, they would have pressure from higher authorities to maintain law and order, stability, to avoid situations जहाँ पे law and order situations आपकी weak हो, ठीक है? So the government would always want to keep these law enforcement agencies under pressure ताकि आपके पास society की stability हो. Because of which, and of course, if these statistics go on record, they go to the FBI. FBI shares it with the government of the time. And then there's pressure on them only, on the law enforcement agencies only, on the police only. So there's a possibility that because of the pressure they have from the higher authorities, they might not simply report it, record it. If they're not recording it, it's something that officially hasn't even happened. Clear, dear? Right? So we were speaking. I just gave you an example of this 6 mark question. Where did it go? Yeah, this 6 mark question. Explain one strength and one limitation of official statistics. Let me remind you all. I've already shared how these 6 mark questions have to be attempted. This is again a quick little idea. I'd want everyone to read through this so that we proceed. Read through this once because I'd expect everyone to do this question once we're done with this topic. Let's move on. Now, one reason why victims might not report a crime to the police. Now, that's another thing that has to be kept in mind. Why victims might not report a crime to the police is that they suffered no financial loss as a result of the crime. What other reasons can you think of explain why some victims do not report crimes? Fear of being harmed again. Threat, yes. They think it's too trivial. They cannot really prove it. Sorry? Come up again. Their own self respect, yeah, that could be another factor. Moving on. This is the question. Explain one strength and one limitation of official statistics. Here's the marking scheme. We have this in May, June 2021, 1-2 variant. Here are the strengths and limitations. Let me remind you all, the examiner is expecting you to write down one strength and one limitation. Only one strength and one limitation. A common mistake many students make is write down more than one strength and limitation, which is not advised at all. Which is not advised at all. Here is how you're expected to go about with it. Identification of a strength, explain why this method has a strength, explain why it is a strength. And there's an example over here as well. Right? Do we proceed? Taking it a step ahead, in theory, the PRC, that is police recorded crime, allow researchers to identify trends in crime over time. Now, if not practically, but theoretically, yes, it makes a lot of sense. You know what? If you see, if let's talk about street crime, let's talk about mobile snatching, something we all can relate to. You know, through these statistics only, the police or these law enforcement agencies, they're actually in a position to compare, how it's through these statistics that us as teachers along with the school management or the college management, we compare how good or bad a child is doing. Something as simple as your monthly attendance, something as simple as your attendance, something as simple as your class participation. All of this is possible through quantitative measures. And of course, when we talk about these police recorded crime statistics, they would allow the researchers to identify trends in crime over time, right? How were things like for instance, like I said, if even if we talk about mobile snatching instances, how were things like back in 2020? How are things like you could choose any month, let's just say October 2020 compared to October 2021? Has there been an increase or a decrease? Clear? However, changes in the classification of offenses mean that trends cannot necessarily be identified. That's another very important point that does affect the validity of a research. For the ones who study psychology, remember operationalization of a concept or defining a concept. For the ones who do not study psychology, do not worry. When we talk about these crimes, the official definitions of these crimes, they keep on changing, right? Like if I say, in many countries, not wearing a mask out in public was a criminal act, right? If not in 2021, in 2020 it was. Clear? So, not wearing a mask, there was no such thing back in 2018, right? So, the official definitions for certain crimes they keep on changing. Likewise, using cellular phone while driving. Do you think there was any such law in Pakistan back in the 1990s? No, there wasn't because you didn't really have cell phones back then. I mean, towards the end you did, but not many people had them. Likewise, if we move on and talk about police priorities, I'm sure you'd agree if I say, at times if you're on the road, you come across a bunch of these traffic police constables. They're making a point that no vehicle has tinted glasses. देखा है? ये आपको randomly एक महीने 2 महीने के बाद नजर आ रहे होते हैं, right? The priorities change, or probably there's a new officer that they have, a new senior who prioritizes one crime over another. Do we understand this? Does anyone have any question? No? So yeah, in theory, PRC statistics allow researchers to identify trends in crime over time. However, changes in the classifications of offense mean that trends cannot necessarily be identified. Police priorities are a particular problem for the accurate identification of trends in crime. For example, if the police prioritize weapon offenses, then time, money, and personnel may be directed at apprehending criminals who commit these offenses. Partly due to this, PRC statistics on weapons offenses may increase over time, even though the actual number of these offenses remains stable, right? Now, over here in this book, they've used weapons as an example, but the example that I was giving you, right? आप पुराने स्टैटिस्टिक्स खोल के देखते हैं, आपको लेट्स से मार्च 2017 के अंदर बहुत ज्यादा नजर आता है टिंटेड ग्लासेस, फिर आपको जून 2017 में नजर आता है, फिर आपको नवंबर 2017 में नजर आता है. तो फेस वैल्यू पे अगर हम स्टैटिस्टिक्स को देखें तो आपको नजर आएगा 3 से 4 साल के बाद कि यार इन्हीं 3 महीनों के अंदर, मार्च बोला था मैंने, एक शायद जून बोला था, एक नवंबर बोला था, राइट? मार्च, जून और नवंबर के अंदर आपके पास ज्यादा गाड़ियां टिंटेड थी. Probably that was not the case. The priorities of these law enforcement agencies changed, and it was the same or pretty much the same all along throughout the year. It was just those months when these law enforcement agencies, they took this crime more seriously than the other months. Does everyone understand this? We all do, right? Now, taking it a step further, we've discussed these police recorded crimes quite a bit. Let's move on and talk about victim surveys. When we talk about these victim surveys are another source of official statistics on crime. Victim surveys, as the name suggests, through surveys you are collecting information from the people who have been victims to certain criminal activities. Clear, dear? So, victim surveys are another source of official statistics on crime. They might take the form of a structured interview, not necessarily, and ask participants whether they have been victims of particular crime over the past year. They are used to measure trends in the crimes they cover. Victim surveys include unreported crime. We've discussed this earlier on. So they give information on offenses that are not included in PRC statistics. However, a victim survey does not cover the full range of crimes recorded by the police. For example, this is the same example that I was giving you a couple of minutes back. For example, it excludes murder or homicide, given that the victim is dead. So-called victimless crimes such as possession of drugs and crimes such as theft from a shop where the victim is a business rather than a person or household. Until recently, victim surveys have not included cybercrime as well. Do we all understand this? Everyone? Right? Now, it again depends on what book you're covering this topic from. Uh, the way I see it, this book by Jonathan Blundell and Chris Livesey, the series consultant again is Mike Kirby. This purple book that we're doing this topic from, I think they have overemphasized on one particular official statistic. But then again, it's shouldn't really be a problem. I want to discuss other aspects of official statistics with you all as well. Let me remind you for the second time, you should expect this as a 26 mark question in your CIs, right? So moving on, let's move on towards the strengths of official statistics. These strengths of official statistics, we have been discussing them earlier as well. Let's just officially deal with them, officially discuss them and get over. To start off with, if we talk about the strengths of official statistics, the first one, they're often readily available, right? There are many countries, especially many developed countries, there are many developed countries where these official statistics not only are reported, recorded, but also published, right? They're readily available, at times probably just a single click away, right? Usually free of cost. Even if you have to bear some cost, it's a tiny amount of money. It's a tiny amount of money. Imagine you're getting hold of the entire nation's statistics and what? Paying $200 in return? $200, I mean, for us Pakistanis, it turns out to be quite a sum, but then again, the amount of data that you're receiving in return, it's nothing as compared to the amount of money you're paying, right? So, in more industrialized societies today, official statistics are often readily available and cost little or nothing to use. Cost little or nothing to use. Yeah, sometimes official statistics are only major source of information on a particular topic. Again, we've discussed this earlier as well. COVID से related जो भी statistics हैं जो आपके पास, I believe there was this app, many people have them on their phone as well. Whatever the data is regarding COVID, where do you think it is coming from? It's through the government. Us as, if I talk about myself, a layman, how do I get to know if there's been a rise in COVID cases or there's been control that our government or our country has been able to have on it? It's through these statistics by the government. It's very simple. Just question yourself, ask yourself, how else? मुझे तो नहीं पता चल सकता, आपको तो नहीं पता चल सकता, किसी भी सोशलॉजिकल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन को भी नहीं पता चल सकता. कोविड वैक्सीनेशन, like birth rate, we get to calculate that through NADRA. How else? There's no other way, right? That's a platform. So, taking it ahead, the second one, care is taken to select representative samples and sample sizes are often large. Such big surveys are usually outside sociologists' research budget. Clear? Number three, many government surveys are well planned and organized with detailed questionnaires or interview schedules. As such, they meet the rigorous standards of sociological research. Any question? Taking it ahead, there are many statistics that are collected regularly, very religiously, strictly. There are so many countries जहाँ पे आपके पास हर 10 सालों के बाद सेंसस कंडक्ट किया जाता है एंड देन ऑफिशियली इसके सारी रिपोर्ट को पब्लिश किया जाता है. क्लियर बेटा? Surveys are often conducted regularly, for example, on a 3 monthly, annual, or 10-year basis. They can allow for comparisons over time and the identification of trends. I mean, the flaws are there. Of course, there would be certain crimes that were not certain crimes, certain categories, let's just say, that weren't present earlier. They are present now. There's a possibility. Get it? Does everyone get this? Moving on. Some official statistics, such as those on births, deaths, marriages, and divorce in contemporary Western societies, are seen as both valid and reliable. Yeah, of course, if you talk about birth rate, in many, I mean, I don't really think I'm in a position to. All right, give me voice isolation. Spectrum. Okay. Just trying to see if I could choose another option for the mic. I believe I have it here. So yeah, let's. All right. Now, I don't think I could opt for noise cancellation here, but it's okay. So yeah, we're talking about these statistics. There are certain statistics that we can consider them to be valid as well. And especially for, in this case, we could talk about hard statistics. अब hard statistics कौन से statistics हैं जिनको आप अपनी मर्जी से मैनिपुलेट नहीं कर सकते, चेंज नहीं कर सकते? For instance, birth rate, death rate, divorce rate, yeah, divorce rate. Divorce, by definition, is the legal termination of marriage. Child, the legal termination of marriage. Anything that's legal holds a record. Get it? I mean, of course, things are very different in Pakistan, the way you see them in Hum TV, but over here we're talking about modern industrial societies. If you talk about more developed countries, things are very difficult, very different. So yeah, hard statistics compared to soft statistics. Soft statistics वो statistics हैं जो के manipulate किए जाते, manipulate होते भी हैं, right? So especially when you talk about these hard statistics, you could say they're more valid, they're more reliable. Do we all understand this, right? Now we're discussing the strengths of official statistics. Again, it's the same point. Let me just continue it from here. Definitions of these events are clear, like I was talking about divorce here. There is no disagreement about what is being measured. There are also standardized procedures for reporting and recording these events. Yeah, but let me clarify. If we talk about divorce in particular, like I just said, divorce is the legal termination of marriage. But there have been certain changes made through divorce reform acts, through the legal system, that have made obtaining divorce easier today as compared to the past. And back in, if we go back in time, I think 1857 tak, it was very difficult for you to obtain divorce. It was close to impossible. And today, with the passage of time, over these last few decades especially, obtaining divorce has become so much easier. It's become so easier. Clear, dear? So that problem would stay there. That problem would stay there, not that we could do anything about this. So there are also standardized procedures for reporting and recording these events. As a result, the statistics are likely to be valid in that they will provide a true and accurate picture of what they are intended to measure. And I'm assuming we all remember what the term validity means here. Validity is the extent to which you're conducting a research that shows or that gives a true picture of what it claims to be recording. A valid research. SE research that provides a true picture of what it claims to have been recording. Right? Moving on. As a result, thank you. ठीक है सही है परफेक्ट मुझे मुझे कॉफ़ी दे दें प्लीज़ कॉफ़ी आधे कप से कम और ब्लैक कॉफ़ी ठीक है या so the statistics are also likely to be reliable in that the use of the same procedure for measurement will produce similar statistics. I'm assuming we all remember what validity and reliability is. Do we? Okay, now a quick little question. We've spoken about positivism and interpretivism. We all know what positivism and interpretivism is. Positivists support quantitative data, yeah? Okay, it wasn't even a question. So positivists support quantitative data. And when you talk about official statistics, they are an example, they're a perfect example of quantitative data. So if anything, we'd have all the support from positivists when it comes to the usage of these official statistics. Do we get this? Right? Positivists recognize the problem of validity and reliability with some official statistics. Nonetheless, they favor the quantitative data available for this source. They argue that statistics based on large representative samples, see, they're large samples, they're representative, like I gave you an example, countrywide, nationwide statistics can provide reliable data from which to draw generalization. To remind you all, we have spoken about the difference between representativeness and generalization. If your sample is representative, there are more chances of your findings or your results or the end conclusion of your research being generalizable. Clear here? Taking it ahead, now that we're done with the strengths of official statistics, let's move on and discuss the limitations. The first one over here. Official statistics from previous periods in the history of Western nations and from less industrialized societies today may be less reliable than those currently collected in the West. This is due to, for example, the underfunding of government research and the relatively low levels of literacy and numeracy in the target population. This point in itself is pretty self explanatory, but still, if we speak about these official statistics, today, if we compare today with, today there's been technological advancement. The education system has gotten better in many industrialized, in many well-developed countries. Education is compulsory. Everyone has to get educated. Literacy rate has gone up. But then again, don't you think for reliability purposes, for comparison purposes, get, in order to be able to work out trends, आपको पुराने टाइम से कंपेयर करना पड़ेगा? What surety, what guarantee do you have that the statistics, if any, that have that you have access to today, वो सही तरीके से कलेक्ट हुए थे या नहीं हुए थे? कलेक्ट हुए भी थे या नहीं हुए थे? Were they actually measuring what you're trying to measure today? Because remember, you can just compare like with like. ठीक है? So that again is a problem. There could be problems in terms of funds too. When we talk about our country, Pakistan, we've always struggled with funds to be able to conduct census. मर्दमशुमारी के लिए हमारे मुल्क में हमेशा ये टेंशन रही है पैसों की, because they're expensive, they cost a lot of money, a lot of resources, monetary and otherwise. आपको ह्यूमन रिसोर्स चाहिए, आपको फंड्स चाहिए, आपको उसके अलावा टाइम चाहिए. There's a lot that has to be there for you to be able to collect these statistics. You need an entire infrastructure. Moving on. So that was the first limitation. The second limitation over here, or the second disadvantage or weakness, some official statistics such as PRC are seen as less likely to be valid and reliable than others. We just discussed this. We just discussed why, right? Because there are many, in the simplest of form, these PRCs, they have many crimes that aren't even recorded. They do not have crimes recorded. Okay? The next one, victim surveys do not provide an accurate measure of the extent of crime in a particular country. For example, they do not include victimless crime. Again, that's just one example. Another could be there would be so many people who wouldn't even feel comfortable getting it reported, even when it comes to victimization surveys. There is a possibility, right? Number 4, I believe. The definitions on which official statistics are based, for example, the definitions of unemployment can change, right? Statistics के लिए आपके पास, जैसे डिवोर्स की हम बात कर रहे थे, डिवोर्स रेट होता तो हार्ड स्टैटिस्टिक है, लेकिन how easy or difficult it is for you to be able to obtain divorce again keeps on changing. Rather, I'd say it has been changing. Clear? The next one. Official statistics measure what governments decide is important. Though there is a lot of political involvement there, no sitting government would want, every sitting government would want a favorable image of their performance during governance, if anything better than their opposition. हर गवर्नमेंट चाहेगी कि उनके टेन्योर के दौरान इकोनॉमिक स्टेबिलिटी ज्यादा दिखाई जाए, अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट कम दिखाया जाए, पॉवर्टी कम दिखाई जाए, क्राइम रेट्स कम दिखाए जाएं. Moving on, since we've spoken about positivists and we've spoken about how positivists, despite of accepting that there are certain issues that compromise validity, they're still very much in favor of the usage of these official statistics. On the other hand, the flip side of the coin, these interpretivist sociologists, remember my kids, interpretivists support the idea of qualitative research methods. Interpretivists are strongly against the idea that these official statistics should be put to use by sociologists. I'll give you a very simple example. Let's talk about this study that was conducted by Maxwell Atkinson. Or let me put it in front of you in a simplistic manner. Atkinson in 1978, he was trying to figure out, or he was rather say trying to explain कि जो आपके पास official ये statistics होते हैं, हमें face value पे नहीं लेना चाहिए. Don't see them the way they are. There's a lot of complexity behind them. They aren't as simple as they apparently look like, right? For instance, if I talk about suicide statistics, if you talk about a suicide, who gets to decide if a suicide is a suicide and not a murder and not a natural death or not an accidental death? It's a coroner. A coroner is an investigating officer, and it's the investigating officer, right, who gets to decide if it's a suicide or not. If the investigating officer thinks otherwise, अगर investigating officer को नहीं लगता कि वो suicide है, तो वो उसको एज ए सुसाइड रिकॉर्ड नहीं करेगा. अगर वो उसे एज ए सुसाइड रिकॉर्ड नहीं करता, तो वो ऑफिशियल स्टैटिस्टिक्स में उस तरीके से नहीं आएगा. एंड लेट्स टेक इट a step backward. I mean, even another step backward. If we talk about a coroner has certain taken for granted assumptions in his head. Coroner भी तो इंसान है. He's giving meaning to what he's seeing. Usually, suicides के साथ एक suicide note देखा जाता है. There's a high likelihood that someone murdered that individual who has died and put a suicide note there, right? Car crashes. Second example, car crashes. They're usually reported as accidental death. What if the driver intentionally crashed the car? In that case, it should have been categorized a suicide, but it was not. Instead, it was reported as an accidental death. So there's a lot of complexity that is involved. And these statistics, according to interpreters, right? I'm trying to sound like an interpretivist right now. According to Atkinson, especially, there's a social construction. Thank you. Chini to nahi dali. Thank you, Ji. Thank you. So, interpretivists tend to focus on how statistics are constructed and to question their validity. Some go further and argue that statistics are simply meanings. For example, Atkinson in 1978 states that suicide is a social construction, a meaning used by coroners to officially classify certain deaths as suicide, right? There is no reality beyond that meaning. The job of a sociologist is simply to discover the meanings used to construct suicide statistics and other statistics. Another example, in Pakistan, it's a very sensitive topic though. In Pakistan, there people who commit suicide, their families, because it's a taboo, and the families, they try to hide it. And there are so many suicides that you later on get to know about, but they're usually marked as natural or accidental deaths. Do you get my point? So, according to, in a nutshell, summing the entire thing up, according to interpretivists, you getting statistics, when you talk about you getting hold of statistics, these statistics आपके कहाँ से आ रही हैं? Statistics आपके, there are human beings who probably have these, like I was saying, taken for granted assumptions that they're using to classify, to categorize, and build up these statistics. The government's doing it. There are certain departments, organizations that are doing it. For you, as a sociologist, it is your responsibility. Like, think like an interpretivist right now. Think like an interpretivist, right? Now, for you as a sociologist, it is your job, it is your responsibility to try to discover, let me highlight this in blue, to try to discover the meaning used to construct suicide statistics and other statistics. Do we understand this? Do we all get this? Oh, this could evaluate the usefulness of official statistics as source of data. Let me just turn it into a question. Uh, Here we go. The 26 mark answer is there, waiting for you. Let's highlight this entire thing. Do we get this? Now that we're done discussing quantitative data, now that we're done discussing an example of quantitative data, that was official statistics under the heading of secondary data, right? I hope you all get this. We're studying secondary data. Secondary data again, there we wanted to do quantitative data. While discussing quantitative data, we discussed official statistics. Now we move a step ahead and we try to look for an example from qualitative data, right? Now let's start off with the usage of personal documents. Here you go. What exactly are personal documents? Personal documents are a type of qualitative data. Now, a typical question, or rather a question that I came across recently was, कि सर क्या personal documents ज़रूरी है कि quantitative data हो? नहीं, quantitative हो सकता है, क्यों नहीं हो सकता? हो सकता है. For instance, Andrew the child was like, sir, can you give an example? Of course I can. Let's just say I'm the sort of person who checks my glucose level, who checks my blood pressure every day, and I maintain a chart. So that is, of course, a personal document, and is of course an example of quantitative data. But for now, our focus over here is qualitative data, and since we study personal documents, we discuss personal documents under the heading of qualitative data. Now, when we talk about these personal documents, it could be anything. It could be a diary, a letter, a photograph, right? It could be personal diary. Remember, we've spoken about the example of Anne Frank's diary. That's an example of qualitative data because it eventually is being put to use to have a look at the qualitative aspects of the experience that that particular child had during the Holocaust when she, along with her family, was hiding from the Nazis. Okay? Now, personal documents are a type of qualitative data. A secondary source, they have not been generated by sociologists, of course, using sociological research methods or at the request of research for research purposes. Instead, they're produced by people during their everyday lives. If it's a photograph, it's a photograph taken by you. If it's a diary, it's a diary that has been maintained by you. If it's a letter, it's probably been maintained, it's been written by you, or it has been written to you, for you. Clear? So, इनसे इसके अंदर आपके पास बायोग्राफीज आ जाएंगी, ऑटोबायोग्राफीज आ जाएंगी. Autobiographies would be an amazing example, right? Books written by many prominent or known people, they could be an example of this, right? So, as part of their family life, their employment, education, or leisure activities, such data are ready-made forms of evidence. Written personal documents include letters, diaries, notes, and autobiographies, while visual personal documents include family photographs as well. Or it could be a combination. There are so many autobiographies that do involve personal photographs in it. Clear? Photographs of yourself when you were young, photographs of your family, your siblings, your parents, so on and so forth. Clear? Now, Written personal documents, like I said, include letters, diaries, notes, and autobiographies, while visual personal documents include photographs. Personal documents can be an expression of people's hopes, worries, feelings, and concerns, just the kind of data that many sociologists look for. Here, now taking a step ahead, if we talk about these personal documents, the question that rises over here is, would it be alright, would it be okay to treat these personal documents at its face value? No, it wouldn't. Right? According to John Scott in 1990, John Scott in 1990 put forward 4 different criteria that he believed should be taken into consideration. 4 different criteria, my dear, that he believed should be taken into consideration to be able to check for the quality or to be able to check for the extent to which these personal documents can be relied upon. Here, there are 4 different criteria that we're talking about over here. The first one over here is authenticity. The second one, my dear, is credibility. The third one is representativeness. And the fourth one is meaning. Let me number them all. The first one over here, like I said, is authenticity. The second one is credibility. The third one is representativeness. And the fourth one is meaning. Clear? So, John Scott offers 4 quality control criteria. Let's highlight this with green over here. Quality control criteria for assessing documents, including personal documents and other qualitative secondary sources. These are authenticity, credibility, representativeness, and meaning. Do we all understand this? Clear? Taking it a step ahead. When we talk about authenticity, what exactly is authenticity? Whereas I assume everyone sitting over here does have an idea about what authenticity is, how authentic someone is, how real something is, right? Authenticity is the document original or a copy. If it is a copy, is it an exact copy or it has been tampered or forged? Clear, dear? Do we understand this? Now, Anne Frank's diary, they say uske kai forged versions bhi hain available. Now, moving on. Number 2, credibility. Credibility is the author of the document sincere and honest in revealing. We're talking about sincerity over here, we're talking about honesty over here, in revealing their true feelings, or do they distort evidence in order to mislead the audience? There is a high possibility there as well. The likelihood that an author might have gotten hold of something and then distorted it and then changed it to distort our audience or to misguide audience or the reader, whoever it is. Clear? Now, there are plenty of examples of distortion, deceit, and lies in documents. Number 3, representativeness. To what extent is the document representative? Now, let me give you a quick little example over here, getting back to the same example that we have been discussing, the Anne Frank's diary example, right? Now, that particular document, do you think it is representative enough? Don't you think it's too less of an evidence? There is a possibility, right? वो क्या रिप्रेजेंट कर रही है? एक छोटी बच्ची का अकाउंट है, वो भी अगर सच है तो एक छोटी बच्ची का अकाउंट है, which of course, I mean, if I take it a step further, don't you think if we talk about these old historical documents, आपके पास, there was a time when only the rich, the elite, the people from upper social classes, they used to be literate. Others couldn't write. If others couldn't write, how do you think you'd be able to have an account of their lives? It's very simple. If you're talking about photographs, do you think that there was decent enough of technology back then? Not really. And even if there was, don't you think a tiny little minority, the rich, the elite, the powerful, the resourceful, they would only be in a position to take photographs? What about the others? So, even if we use these 2 examples, it's forcing me to believe that whatever it is that we're getting from back in time, it isn't really representative. Clear? Representativeness. To what extent is the document representative? For example, is an old family photograph that was kept in an archive typical of those taken at the time? Did people throw away photographs that they disliked? Like you guys delete pictures, right? Did people throw away photographs that they disliked? Were the authors of historical documents typically middle class men rather than the women or working class people? Again, men, अगर आप न्यू लिटरेसी रेट निकालते हैं तो आपको ज़्यादा मर्द हजरात लिटरेट नजर आएंगे एज कम्पेयर टू
women. The question of representativeness is particularly important in the case of historical documents, as many have been lost or tempered. Those that remain may not be typical of the wider general population. Clear? So we're talking about these four different criteria, like I said, that were put forward by John Scott in 1990. The first one was authenticity. The second one, my dear, is credibility. The third one is, and the fourth one is meaning. What does a document mean? Researchers must be able to understand words and phrases. Are you, as a researcher, able to interpret it in a manner that whoever the person was who created that document or who wrote that document, are you able to interpret it the way they wanted it to be interpreted? How likely is it that you might not be able to interpret it the way it was supposed to be interpreted? The intended meaning of the author or the writer, क्या आप उसको decode कर पाए हैं, नहीं कर पाए? All of this matters. Clear here? So, what does the document mean? Researchers must be able to understand words and phrases when analyzing written material such as notes and letters. Ideally, they should know the meaning intended by the writer and what is understood by various members of the audience. Clear here? Now, let's take it a step further real quick and talk about the ethics and documentary research. Ethical issues have a very important role to play. You're talking about getting hold of something that does not belong to you. Do you have permission? Does the legal system allow you? The data protection legislation may prevent certain documents from being used without permission from the individuals concerned and from possible copyright holders as well. Clear here? Does anyone have any question? Do we all get this? The use of some documents include visual data, raise issues of confidentiality, anonymity, and consent. For example, these issues can cause trouble: confidentiality, anonymity, consent. For example, can individuals be recognized and identified in family photographs? If so, should the people concerned or the relatives, if the people have died, be informed and the permission requested? I mean, just because you got hold of something, you cannot simply publish it and claim to be the owner. The people concerned, if that particular person isn't alive, you should ideally seek permission from the family members. These are some of the questions about ethics which need to be considered when conducting documentary research. Right? This was pretty simple. Let's move on towards the strengths and limitations. Again, let me remind you all, there's a likelihood of you getting a question, and especially when it comes to section A in your paper. Section B may be asked. For instance, you might get a question that might say, personal documents are too subjective to be used by sociologists in a sociological research. Let me just write it down. Oops. It could be something like this. Evaluate the view that personal documents are too subjective to be used by sociologists. 26-mark question. Do we understand this? I mean, of course, your answer should more or less revolve around personal documents, but as for comparison purposes, you could use other research methods as well. that are or are not subjective, and to what extent. Clear here? So moving on. If we talk about the strengths of personal documents, the first point, personal documents provide a unique and valuable source of information. Of course, unique and valuable source of information जो शायद आपको कहीं और से ना मिल पाए. There's a possibility, right, on people's hopes and fears, wishes and desires, their world views and reflections on the situation. Such data may not be available from primary sources, right? Hitler's autobiography, how else do you think you'd get to know, right? Number two, as personal documents were not created specifically for research purpose, they are seen as non-reactive, or in other words, see, we're talking about them being neutral. They're neutral for you. As a sociologist, they're neutral for you because you weren't the person who created them. तो आपका बायसनेस तो उसमें नहीं आ सकता. आपका इंटरव्यू बायसनेस, आपका एनी अदर फॉर्म ऑफ बायसनेस या आपका ऑब्जर्वर इफेक्ट उसके अंदर नहीं आ सकता क्योंकि डेटा आपने कलेक्ट नहीं किया. Clear? Number three, advantages again. In some respect, personal documents are just the kind of data that interpreters seek. Of course, qualitative aspects, they'd always want to use qualitative aspects. They can provide qualitative data with a richness and depth not always found in data produced by sociological research. Most have not influenced by sociologists. Most have not been influenced by sociologists. Documents might present a false picture either intentionally or unintentionally. They may distort, they may be based on ignorance and misunderstanding. However, they're still valid that they are actual products of human behavior and not something that a sociologist artificially or in an artificial situation produced. Clear here? Now, I know time's up. 2 more minutes and we're done. If we move on towards the limitations of personal documents, number one, like many documents, personal documents are often written for a particular audience. When you're writing anything for a particular audience, the chances of you involving, the chances of your whatever the writing is or whatever the product is that you've eventually come up with being somewhat distorted are always there. We cannot rule out that possibility. Clear here? They may say more about the writer than the events they describe. Clear here? Number two, the writer may not be representative of the group they belong. We just discussed this. That's a disadvantage. Number three, rather than providing an objective account, personal documents tend to be one-sided, prejudiced, and based on a particular viewpoint and value judgments. However, not all sociologists would necessarily see this as a disadvantage, as it does provide people's perspectives, right? Anne Frank's example, right? I'm using the same example over and over again so that you can, one, remember it for your CIs if needed. Number two, so that you could relate to it and use it as an example to explain yourself as well, right? तो किसी एक का व्यू है, परवेज मुशर्रफ की ऑटोबायोग्राफी उसका व्यू है, हिटलर की ऑटोबायोग्राफी उसका व्यू है, जो कि डेफिनेटली वन साइडेड है, प्रेजुडिस्ड है और एक पर्टिकुलर पर्सपेक्टिव या व्यू पॉइंट को रिफ्लेक्ट कर रहा है. तो ये इसकी एक लिमिटेशन है जिसे हम इग्नोर नहीं कर सकते, right? Moving on, if we talk about the positivist point of view, this comes without saying. Positivists, since they support the idea of using quantitative data, they tend not to use personal documents as the main source of data. It is often difficult to quantify documents, and you all do know by now how important quantitative data is for positivists. It is also difficult to obtain representative sample of document material. Representativeness is again a problem. Let me highlight this with blue, sorry, okay, wait. Material and to make generalization from the data. This is particularly true of historical documents as the authors were not representative of the wider population. Like I was giving an example, there's a possibility that it might be written by someone who was literate, someone who was a male, and they do not represent the entire wider population. Clear? The next one. In many eras, literate people were in a minority and were usually better off, and documents were more likely to be written by men than women. So that would give you a very androcentric view about the entire society, right? Which might be very exclusive about that particular social group. Does anyone have any question? So that was a quick little session on the usage of personal documents as an example of qualitative data. We studied this under the heading of secondary research. Next in line, we have digital contents that we'd do in the next class. Till then, take care of yourself. Stay happy, healthy, safe, and protected. Stay humble. Spread positivity, spread smiles, and Allah Hafiz.